September 5th, 10th, 1943 dawned grey and ominous over the Rolls-Royce factory in Derby, England, where the final Merlin engine destined for North American aviation rolled off the production line. Within weeks, this same power plant would transform an already promising American fighter into the weapon that would break the back of Hermann Göring's once invincible Luftwaffe. The North American P-51 Mustang had begun life as a disappointment. Designed in 1940 by a small team at North American Aviation under Dutch Kindleberger's leadership, the aircraft initially flew with the underpowered Allison V1710 engine. British test pilots at the Royal Aircraft Establishment found it adequate at low altitudes but woefully inadequate above 15,000 feet, precisely where the war was being fought over Europe. Major Tommy Hitchcock, a wealthy American polo player turned military attaché in London, witnessed firsthand the Mustang's limitations during combat trials in 1942. The aircraft's sleek laminar flow wing and advanced aerodynamics impressed everyone who saw it, but its performance at altitude left much to be desired. German Messerschmitt Bf 109 pilots routinely outclimbed and outfought the early Mustangs, treating them as little more than target practice. The breakthrough came through an almost accidental marriage of American airframe technology and British engine expertise. Ronald Harker, Rolls-Royce's chief test pilot, examined a captured Mustang Mark I at Duxford Airfield in April 1942. His engineering eye immediately recognized the potential hidden within the aircraft's clean lines and innovative design. "This machine would be transformed with our Merlin," he wrote in his official report to Air Ministry officials, according to records held at the Imperial War Museum. Harker's suggestion sparked immediate interest at both Rolls-Royce and the Air Ministry. The Merlin 61 engine, already proving its worth in the Supermarine Spitfire Mark IX, offered everything the Mustang lacked: superb high-altitude performance, reliability, and power. The two-stage, two-speed supercharger system allowed the engine to maintain its power output well above 30,000 feet, exactly where bomber escorts needed to operate. By October 1942, the first Mustang Mark X with a Merlin engine took to the skies over Hucknall Airfield. Test pilot Jeffrey Quill, who had been instrumental in developing the Spitfire, found himself amazed by the transformation. The same aircraft that had struggled at altitude now climbed effortlessly to 40,000 feet and beyond. Its range, always impressive, now extended to over 1,600 miles with external fuel tanks. The implications were staggering. For the first time in the war, the Allies possessed a fighter capable of escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The 8th Air Force had been hemorrhaging bombers during unescorted daylight raids, with some missions suffering casualty rates exceeding 20%. The arrival of long-range escorts would change everything, though the Germans remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering against them as 1943 drew to a close. December 7, 1943 marked exactly 2 years since Pearl Harbor, and Lieutenant Colonel Doane Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group received word that would reshape the European air war. His unit, along with several others, would soon transition from Republic P-47 Thunderbolts to the new North American P-51 Mustangs. The veteran pilot, who had already flown Spitfires with the Royal Air Force Eagle squadrons, understood the significance of this moment better than most. The first production P-51B Mustangs began arriving at English airfields in November 1943. Pilots who had grown accustomed to the massive, powerful Thunderbolt found themselves climbing into a radically different machine. Where the P-47 was built like a tank, weighing over 7 tons fully loaded, the Mustang was a thoroughbred lighter, more agile, and possessing an almost supernatural grace in the air. Captain Chuck Yeager, then flying with the 357th Fighter Group, recalled his first impression of the Mustang in his post-war memoirs. The cockpit sat further aft than in most fighters, providing excellent visibility in all directions. The laminar flow wing, designed by Edgar Schmude's team at North American, cut through the air with minimal drag. Most importantly, the internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons, expandable to 489 gallons with external tanks, promised unprecedented range. German intelligence officers monitoring Allied aircraft production had noted the increasing numbers of P-51 aircraft rolling out of North American's Inglewood, California factory. However, they categorized these machines as improved versions of the earlier, unsuccessful Allison-powered variants. Oberst Adolf Galland, general of fighter aircraft for the Luftwaffe, later admitted that German high command completely underestimated the strategic impact of the Merlin-powered Mustang. The transformation was not merely mechanical but tactical. General James Doolittle, who assumed command of the 8th Air Force in January 1944, implemented revolutionary changes to fighter escort doctrine. Previously, fighters had been ordered to stay close to bomber formations, severely limiting their effectiveness. Doolittle authorized his Mustang pilots to leave the bombers when enemy fighters appeared, pursuing them aggressively rather than maintaining defensive positions. Training intensified throughout the winter of 1943 into 1944. Pilots learned to maximize the Mustang's range through careful fuel management and formation flying techniques. The aircraft's exceptional high-altitude performance required new combat tactics, as engagements now regularly occurred above 35,000 feet. The .650 caliber Browning machine guns, while carrying fewer rounds than the Thunderbolt's 8 guns, proved devastatingly effective when properly employed. As reported in official 8th Air Force combat records housed at Maxwell Air Force Base, the first long-range escort mission deep into Germany was scheduled for early 1944. The target would be central Germany, previously beyond the reach of Allied fighters. German pilots, accustomed to engaging unescorted bombers after Allied fighters reached their operational limits, would face a rude awakening. The stage was set for a fundamental shift in the balance of air power over Europe, though the full implications remained hidden in the gathering winter clouds of 1943. February 3, 1944, Major James Goodson of the 4th Fighter Group pushed his P-51 Mustang through 32,000 feet, leading his squadron deeper into German airspace than any American fighter had flown before. Below them, streams of Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses and consolidated B-24 Liberators headed toward targets around Berlin, protected for the first time in their grueling journey by long-range escorts. The German reaction was swift and confused. Luftwaffe ground controllers, monitoring the approaching formations through their radar network, initially dismissed reports of single-engine fighters so far from their bases. Major Gunther Roll, flying with Jagdgeschwader 11, later described the shock of encountering Mustangs over central Germany. We expected to find the bombers alone, as always. Instead, we found ourselves facing fresh American fighters at our own altitude, ready for combat. The first major engagement occurred near Osnabrück, where elements of the 354th Fighter Group encountered Messerschmitt, Bf-109 aircraft from Jagdgeschwader 26. Captain Don Gentile, flying his Mustang Shangri-La, found himself in a turning fight with Hauptmann Klaus Mietisch, one of Germany's most experienced pilots. The encounter demonstrated the Mustang's superiority in sustained combat. Where German fighters were forced to husband fuel for the journey home, the Americans could fight aggressively, knowing they had sufficient range to return to England. Gentile's combat report, preserved in National Archives records, described the engagement. The enemy aircraft attempted to dive away, but I was able to maintain pursuit. At 28,000 feet, I achieved firing position and observed strikes on the fuselage and wing root. The aircraft entered an unrecoverable spin. Mietisch, a veteran of over 400 combat sorties, became one of the first casualties of the Mustang's long-range capability. The psychological impact on German pilots was immediate and profound. Oberfeldwebel Johann Steinhoff, flying with Jagdgeschwader 7, reported to his squadron commander that American fighters appeared to be everywhere at once. Previously, Luftwaffe pilots could count on fighting fresh opponents only near the enemy's bases. Now, they faced the prospect of combat throughout their operational area, with no sanctuary remaining over their homeland. General Adolf Galland convened an emergency conference at Luftwaffe High Command on February 5th, just 2 days after the first deep escort missions. Intelligence reports confirmed his worst fears. The Americans had fielded a fighter with the range to accompany bombers to any target in the Reich. The implications were staggering. German fighter tactics, developed over 4 years of successful defensive operations, would require complete revision. The numbers told a devastating story. During the first week of February 1944, Luftwaffe losses climbed to unprecedented levels while Allied bomber losses dropped dramatically. The 5th 10th Air Force, operating from Italian bases, reported similar results when their P-51 equipped groups began escorting missions to southern Germany and Austria. The stranglehold that German fighters had maintained over their homeland for nearly 5 years was breaking. Weather grounded most operations by February 7th, but the damage was already done. In just 5 days, the strategic balance of the air war had shifted decisively. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, once confident in his pilots' ability to bleed the Allied bombing campaign to death, now faced the prospect of defending the Reich against escorted formations penetrating to its very heart. The Mustang had announced its arrival with devastating effectiveness, and there would be no turning back. March 6, 1944 found Hauptmann Egon Meyer, Germany's leading destroyer of American heavy bombers, climbing through thin air above Brandenburg in his Messerschmitt Bf 109 Gustav 6. The veteran pilot, credited with downing 102 Allied aircraft including 38 four-engine bombers, was about to face an opponent unlike any he had encountered in nearly 4 years of combat. Meyer had perfected the art of bomber destruction, developing the devastating head-on attack that became standard Luftwaffe doctrine against flying fortresses and liberators. His Jagdgeschwader II Richthofen had earned a fearsome reputation among 8th Air Force crews who dubbed his pilots Abbeville Kids near the French coast. But on this crystal-clear morning, as 600 Allied bombers approached Berlin with Mustang escorts, everything would change. The encounter came at 28,000 feet, where Meyer's formation of 12 Bf 109s intercepted the lead bomber group. What they found waiting was not the usual collection of war-weary P-47 Thunderbolts turning for home, but fresh P-51 Mustangs from the 357th Fighter Group, led by Captain Chuck Yeager. American ace, who would later become the first man to break the sound barrier, was hunting experienced German pilots with methodical precision. According to post-war interviews conducted by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, preserved at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, the engagement lasted less than 10 minutes but changed the course of the air war. Meyer, attempting his trademark frontal attack on a B-17, found himself bounced by Yeager and his wingmen. The German pilot, for the first time in his career, was forced into a defensive battle over his own territory. The Mustang's superior performance at altitude became immediately apparent. Where the Gustav 6's engine began losing power above 25,000 feet, the Merlin-powered P-51 maintained full effectiveness to 40,000 feet and beyond. Meyer found himself unable to climb away from his pursuers, a tactic that had saved him in dozens of previous encounters with Allied fighters. The running battle carried the formation westward toward Magdeburg, with Yeager maintaining pressure throughout. Meyer's aircraft, struck by 50 caliber rounds from the Americans' guns, began streaming coolant. At 15,000 feet, With his engine overheating and oil pressure dropping, the German ace was forced to bail out over the very territory he had defended so successfully. He would not survive the encounter, becoming another casualty of the Mustang's deadly efficiency. News of Mayer's death spread quickly through Luftwaffe fighter units. If Germany's most successful bomber-destroyer could fall to American fighters over the Reich itself, no pilot was safe. Morale, already strained by increasing losses and fuel shortages, began to crumble. Young replacement pilots, rushed through abbreviated training programs, found themselves facing opponents with not only superior equipment but overwhelming numerical advantage. General Gallen's situation reports to Reichsmarschall Gring painted an increasingly desperate picture. German fighter strength was hemorrhaging experienced pilots faster than training schools could replace them. Meanwhile, American Mustang groups were multiplying, with new squadrons arriving in England monthly. The mathematical equation was simple and terrifying. At current loss rates, the Luftwaffe would cease to exist as an effective fighting force within months. The hunters had become the hunted, and the outcome was no longer in doubt. April 24, 1944 witnessed the largest air battle in European history as over 2,000 Allied aircraft penetrated deep into the Reich, targeting aircraft factories and fuel installations across Germany and Austria. Leading elements of the assault force, Colonel Doane Blakesley guided his 4th Fighter Group Mustangs toward Munich, where intelligence reported heavy concentrations of Luftwaffe interceptors based at Augsburg and Landsberg airfields. The German response was massive but increasingly desperate. General Lieutenant Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, commanding Luftflotte Reich, had assembled nearly 800 fighters for what many pilots sensed would be a decisive battle. Among them flew Oberleutnant Walter Kropinski, a veteran ace with 197 victories, leading a mixed formation of Focke-Wulf FW-190 aircraft from Jagdgeschwader 11. The 23-year-old pilot knew that this might be his unit's last opportunity to inflict serious damage on the Allied bombing campaign. The mathematics of aerial warfare had shifted decisively against Germany. Where once Luftwaffe fighters could count on engaging exhausted Allied pilots at the limit of their range, they now faced fresh Mustang pilots with fuel to burn and altitude advantage. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group, flying his 3rd mission of the week, exemplified this new reality. His P-51 Reggie's Reply carried sufficient fuel for over 7 hours of flight time, allowing him to hunt German fighters throughout their operational area. The engagement developed over a front stretching from Stuttgart to Regensburg, with multiple air battles occurring simultaneously at various altitudes. Near Augsburg, Major Georg Peter Eder, leading Jagdgeschwader 1, attempted to coordinate a mass attack on B-24 formations approaching the Messerschmitt factory. His carefully planned assault disintegrated when 36 Mustangs from the 352nd Fighter Group dove into his formation from 30,000 feet. According to classified after-action reports declassified in 1975 and held at the National Archives, the slaughter was systematic. German pilots, many with fewer than 50 hours of combat experience, found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned by veteran American aces flying superior aircraft. Lieutenant Hans Waldmann, 19 years old and on his 4th combat mission, never saw the Mustang that sent his Messerschmitt spinning toward the Bavarian countryside. The day's losses proved catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. Official German records, captured at war's end, showed 128 fighters destroyed and 87 pilots killed or missing losses. That represented nearly 2 full Jagdgeschwader. In contrast, Allied losses totaled 38 aircraft, including just 14 P-51 Mustangs. The exchange rate that had once favored German pilots had reversed completely. More devastating than the immediate losses was the destruction of irreplaceable experience. Hauptmann Heinrich Erler, Knight's Cross holder with 208 victories, died in the flames of his FW-190 near Nuremberg. Major Anton Haeckel, with 192 kills, bailed out with severe burns that ended his combat career. These were not merely statistics, but the backbone of German fighter aviation, accumulated over 4 years of constant combat. General Gallen's evening briefing to Hermann Göring was brutally frank. The day fighter force was bleeding to death, unable to replace losses or provide adequate training for replacement pilots. Fuel shortages meant that new pilots received fewer than 20 flight hours before entering combat against opponents with hundreds of hours of experience. The Reich's daylight defense was collapsing, and everyone in the room knew it. The Mustang had completed its mission. Air superiority over Germany belonged to the Allies. September 11th, 1944 marked a turning point that few outside the upper echelons of Nazi leadership fully comprehended. As General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf reviewed casualty reports in his Berlin headquarters, the stark numbers revealed a military disaster of unprecedented proportions. Since the Mustangs had gained air superiority over the Reich 6 months earlier, the Luftwaffe had lost over 4,000 pilots, the equivalent of an entire air force. The transformation was visible everywhere. American bomber formations now crossed German airspace virtually unopposed, their Mustang escorts having swept the skies clean of effective resistance. Major Johann Steinhoff, one of the few surviving aces of Jagdgeschwader 7, found himself leading formations of 18- and 19-year-old pilots with fewer than 40 hours of flight time. Against these inexperienced replacements, veteran American pilots flying superior aircraft achieved kill ratios that would have been inconceivable earlier in the war. Colonel John Meyer, commanding officer of the 352nd Fighter Group, exemplified this new reality. Flying his P-51 Petit Third, Meyer had accumulated 26 confirmed victories, most against experienced German pilots. His combat reports, preserved in Air Force archives, described encounters where single flights of 4 Mustangs regularly engaged and defeated formations twice their size, relying on superior training, equipment, and tactical flexibility. The German aviation industry, target of countless Allied raids, struggled desperately to maintain production under increasingly difficult conditions. The Erle Maschinenwerk factory in Leipzig, once capable of producing 150 Messerschmitt Bf 109s monthly, now operated at 15% capacity due to material shortages and constant air attacks. Even when aircraft rolled off production lines, finding qualified pilots to fly them had become nearly impossible. According to declassified intelligence reports from the Office of Strategic Services, held at the National Archives, German pilot training had been reduced to 25 hours of flight instruction before combat assignment. In contrast, American pilots arrived in Europe with over 200 hours of training and transitioned to combat, gradually under experienced leadership. Captain George Preddy of the 352nd Fighter Group, the top Mustang ace with 26 8/10 confirmed victories, represented this systematic advantage in pilot development. The strategic implications extended far beyond individual combat encounters. With air superiority established, Allied bombers could target Germany's remaining industrial capacity with devastating precision. The synthetic fuel plants that powered the Luftwaffe's remaining aircraft became priority targets, further constraining German operations. Reichsmarschall Göring, once boastful about his invincible air force, rarely appeared at tactical briefings, leaving operational command to increasingly desperate subordinates. The final irony lay in German attempts to counter the Mustang threat. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter, potentially capable of challenging Allied air superiority, remained grounded due to fuel shortages and pilot training difficulties. Even Germany's most advanced aircraft could not overcome the fundamental problem. The experienced pilots who might have flown them effectively lay buried in cemeteries across the Reich. By autumn 1944, the air war over Europe had effectively ended. German day fighter operations continued in name only, with remaining units reduced to ineffective harassment of overwhelming Allied formations. The P-51 Mustang had achieved what many military theorists believed impossible: complete air superiority over an enemy's homeland. From the drawing boards of North American aviation to the skies over Berlin, the transformation had taken just 4 years, but its impact would last forever. January 5-10, 1945, found the remnants of the once mighty Luftwaffe gathered for Operation Bodenplatte, a desperate last-gasp attempt to regain some measure of air superiority over Western Europe. Nearly 800 German aircraft, representing virtually every serviceable fighter in the Reich, prepared to strike Allied airfields in Belgium, Holland, and northern France. Leading this forlorn hope was Oberst Dietrich Rabach, a veteran with over 100 victories who knew better than most that this mission represented the death throes of German air power. The operation began before dawn, with German formations flying at treetop level to avoid radar detection. Among the attacking aircraft were the few remaining pilots from once elite units like Jagdgeschwader 26 Schlagiter and Jagdgeschwader 54 Grunhers. Many pilots, hastily trained on unfamiliar aircraft types, had never flown their assigned fighters in combat. The contrast with early war Luftwaffe operations was stark and tragic. At Asch Airfield in Belgium, Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer was conducting his morning briefing for the 352nd Fighter Group when German fighters swept across the field at 50 feet altitude. The surprise was complete, but the damage was limited. Most Mustangs were dispersed in protective revetments, and ground crews had learned effective camouflage and concealment techniques through 3 years of warfare. More importantly, the attack revealed the fundamental weakness of German planning. They had achieved tactical surprise, but lacked the resources for sustained offensive operations. The Allied response was swift and devastating. Within hours of the German attacks, hundreds of P-51 Mustangs were airborne, hunting the retreating enemy formations. Captain Ray Wetmore of the 359th Fighter Group, flying his P-51 Daddy's Girl, intercepted a formation of Focke-Wulf FW-190 aircraft near the Rhine River. The ensuing combat demonstrated everything that had changed since 1943. Experienced American pilots in superior aircraft faced exhausted German pilots flying on fumes with minimal training. The battle statistics, compiled from both Allied and captured German records, revealed the true cost of Bodenplatte. The Luftwaffe lost over 200 aircraft, including many of their last experienced pilots. Oberst Rudolf Sinner, Geschwader Kommode of Jagdgeschwader 27, died in the flaming wreckage of his Messerschmitt near Cologne. Major Georg Peter Eder, with 78 victories, was killed attempting to reach friendly lines after bailing out over Allied territory. These were not replaceable assets, but the final reserves of German aerial expertise. According to post-war testimony preserved in U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey documents, General Adolf Galland later described Bodenplatte as the death of the German day fighter force. The operation had consumed the Luftwaffe's remaining reserves for negligible strategic gain. Allied airfields were operational within hours, while German losses represented aircraft and pilots that could never be replaced. The mathematics of attrition, which had favored Germany in 1940, now worked inexorably against the Reich. The broader context made the failure even more poignant. While the Luftwaffe squandered its last resources in futile attacks on Allied airfields, American Mustang groups roamed freely over Germany, strafing trains, airfields, and military installations. The strategic initiative had passed completely to the Allies, who could choose when, where, and how to engage remaining German forces. The hunter-prey relationship established by the Mustang's arrival had reached its logical conclusion. As winter deepened into spring 1945, organized Luftwaffe resistance virtually ceased. Individual pilots still flew occasional sorties, but the systematic aerial defense of Germany was over. The P-51 Mustang, underestimated by German intelligence and born from the marriage of American innovation and British engineering, had fulfilled its destiny. The skies belonged to the Allies, and victory was assured. May 8, 1945 dawned clear and quiet over European airspace as word spread that Germany had surrendered unconditionally. Colonel Don Blakesley, now commanding the 4th Fighter Wing, stood on the tarmac at Debden Airfield surrounded by dozens of P-51 Mustangs that bore the scars and victory markings of 3 years of relentless combat. The silence was profound. For the first time since September 1939, European skies were at peace. The statistical record of the Mustang's achievement was staggering. Allied air forces had produced over 15,000 P-51 aircraft, with nearly 14,000 reaching operational units. These fighters had destroyed over 4,000 German aircraft in air-to-air combat while maintaining loss rates significantly lower than any previous long-range fighter. More importantly, they had enabled a strategic bombing campaign that crippled German war production and hastened the Reich's collapse. The human cost of victory was measured in both American and German graves. The United States had lost approximately 2,000 P-51 pilots during the war, while German fighter losses exceeded 25,000 aircrew killed, wounded, or missing. Among the German dead were virtually all of the Luftwaffe's pre-war professionals and most of their wartime-trained replacements. An entire generation of German aviators had been destroyed in the skies over Europe. Captain Chuck Yeager, preparing for his transition to experimental test flying, reflected on his 26 months of combat operations. His P-51 Glamorous Glennis had carried him through 64 combat missions and 11 confirmed victories, including an engagement where he downed 5 German aircraft in a single sortie. The Mustang had transformed him from a West Virginia farm boy into an ace pilot and national hero, exemplifying the aircraft's role in creating America's aerial elite. The technological legacy was equally significant. The Mustang's laminar flow wing, developed by North American's team under Edgar Schmude, influenced fighter design for decades. Its combination of range, speed, and maneuverability established parameters that guided post-war aviation development. More subtly, the aircraft demonstrated the decisive advantage that superior logistics and industrial capacity could provide in modern warfare. According to official U.S. Air Force histories housed at Maxwell Air Force Base, the Mustang's strategic impact extended beyond individual combat encounters. By achieving air superiority over Germany, these fighters enabled the tactical air support that proved crucial during the Normandy invasion and subsequent ground campaigns. German panzer divisions, once protected by Luftwaffe cover, found themselves vulnerable to Allied fighter bombers operating with impunity. The German perspective, captured in post-war interviews with surviving Luftwaffe officers, revealed deep respect for the P-51's capabilities. General Adolf Galland, writing in his memoirs, The First and the Last, acknowledged that the Mustang's arrival marked the Gentilem Adolf Galland, writing in his memoirs The First and the Last, acknowledged that the Mustang's arrival marked the Mustang's arrival Gaydend, beginning of the end for German air power. The aircraft that Luftwaffe intelligence had initially dismissed as another mediocre American design had become the instrument of their destruction. As peace settled over Europe, the surviving aces on both sides began the difficult transition to civilian life. Many would never fully escape the memories of aerial combat, the friends lost to flak and fighters, the responsibility of command in desperate circumstances. The P-51 Mustang had carried them through the most intensive aerial warfare in human history, earning a place in aviation legend that time would never diminish. The Mustang had run free across European skies, and in doing so had helped liberate a continent from tyranny. From the drawing boards of Inglewood to the smoking ruins of Berlin, the Silver Fighters had written their names in contrails across the heavens. The Germans had never expected such a weapon, and when it arrived, their fate was sealed. The age of American air power had begun, carried on the wings of the incomparable P-51 Mustang.